you so much, Daryl. We appreciate you and all of the work that you are doing in Boston and all of the work that Minister Donnie Savage is doing. We appreciate you so much. Thank you for hosting this show. You are tuned in to Legal Views with Attorney Sheila Stuart. We are broadcasting on CJoy Network, Live 360, Facebook Live, and YouTube. We have in the studio with us today a scholar out of Baltimore, Maryland, the one and only Mr. Tony Torain. Mr. Torain is an equity partner as well as a shareholder at Posinelli Law Firm in Washington, D.C. Furthermore, he sits on various boards. And one of the boards that he sits on is the Human Rights for Kids. This is a very, very interesting board because this is one of the boards that advocate for children that are being subject to cruel and unusual punishment. Think about that. Children being subject to cruel and unusual punishment. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen, we're asking for your support for Human Rights for Kids. This is a not-for-profit organization that we would like for you to read about and get more information on, that so that you can help young people wherever you are residing. Hello, Mr. Torain. How are you today?
I'm doing good, Attorney Stewart. It's good to see you again.
It is great seeing you. Thank you for being with us on today. Thank you for taking the time out to discuss this very, very important body of work that you are involved in. You do a lot of many interesting things in Washington, D.C. And so we're going to allow our guests to just hear about the work that you are involved in and why it is so very important. Mr. Torain, we want to get started. What would you like for me to call you, Mr. Torain or?
No, Tony's fine.
Okay.
Tony is fine.
I'll call you Tony. You can call me Sheila. And so I just want to give a quick overview of this organization, Human Rights for Kids, and for people to kind of understand what's going on, that this organization, they are a huge organization that advocate for kids. And there was a very, very significant case that Tony Torain just argued before the United States Supreme Court. He was the leader of a group of attorneys. He led these attorneys in fighting for these young people. He wrote an amicus curiae brief, and that's basically friends of the court. And he wrote this brief to advocate and to help these children and young people that are being subject to all of these terrible laws and so forth. So can you tell us about the work that you are involved in and about this landmark case that you just argued and did your brief on?
Definitely. Well, I just want to clarify, I wasn't doing oral arguments for the justices, but we did argue in our brief. So the Human Rights for Kids, as you mentioned, is a nonprofit organization that advocates in various ways for the civil rights of children. And so what we did, the founder of the organization and the CEO is James Dold, and he's a friend of mine from law school. So I've known James since law school, like 13, 14 years now. And we had been friends, but he'd started this work after law school. And he's very passionate about different things, human rights in general, because we have done some work in that space. But he was vitally, I guess more specifically, focused in on civil rights for children. Children who have been misused, mishandled, and even in the criminal justice system, there are a lot of mechanisms that could keep children kind of caught up and then follows them in their adulthood and limits their ability to have different opportunities for employment, for success, for careers. And so that was a critical, critical thing for James to address. And so we've been friends for years, and to 2020, he invited me to help write an amicus brief. We were licensed in the Supreme Court, and have been there in DC with my firm Posinelli. He had asked us to help and support in filing an amicus brief in the Supreme Court on the Edwards versus Vinoy case, and that case had to do with whether non-unanimous jury verdicts were constitutional, and rather whether the application should be retroactive. So, just to give you a little bit of background for that case, for the in the Edwards versus Vinoy case, there was a case before that, the Ramos case, which essentially said the Supreme Court said that you had to be convicted by a unanimous jury. There are 2 states in the union, Louisiana and Oregon, that allowed for a 10-2 decision from a jury. And for that specifically, the history of the Louisiana statute, if you look at the legislative history, which is what the legislature goes through when they're putting together a bill, the notes are recorded. If you look at the legislative history, the law was specifically passed for a 10-2 verdict because they were trying to disenfranchise Black jurors. So that if you have, okay, we have to get them on the jury, but if you have 2 Black jurors and 10 white jurors, and it's a Black defendant, then we can convict. We don't need those 2 Black votes. Now, there's several problems with that when you look at how it impacts the potential impact on children, where there's not beyond a reasonable doubt standard. If you have 2 holdouts, then that looks like reasonable doubt. The presumption of innocence. I mean, it is so much of the fundamental principles of criminal jurisprudence that were impacted by these 2 states that, and specifically Louisiana, and even Justice Kavanaugh, who's on the conservative side of the court, was essentially saying that this is based on racism. And so based on that, the Ramos, they said, okay, you have to have unanimous jury verdicts. In Edwards, we were saying that should apply to cases decided before Ramos. And so I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with Master P's, a famous rapper. His brother was actually convicted by a 10-2 verdict. And there's questions about the state's case or the Louisiana's case in that situation. And so if Edwards had been decided our way, he might have been released because it was applying to prior cases on collateral review. So the justices didn't go our way on that one. But essentially, that kind of inflamed and emboldened my passion to work with Human Rights for Kids and to continue to fight and try to advocate for them in the Supreme Court. On the board of Human Rights for Kids, there are many state legislators, state senators, state delegates from around the country who, both sides of the aisle, both the Democrats, Republicans, Independents, who feel strongly about advocating and defending the rights of children. And so it was a great opportunity. So after we finished that first brief in Edwards, James asked if I wanted to be on the board because we had been helping, we had been working. I got the advocacy bug, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so because we were already close, we were already friends, kind of working with each other, I was like, of course. I mean, there were great people on the board. Suzanne LaPierre, who co-authored the Bloomberg Law article with me, that was released on Monday. She's the president of the board. She's great to work with. She also assisted with the development of the brief. And so we came to this year, there's another opportunity in the Wooden case to, again, write this brief on behalf of children. So our amicus brief essentially was saying, justices, we know that you're going to issue this rule, but because children can be tried as adults in most every state, your decision in this case is going to have far-reaching impacts to where you have a situation where a kid makes several bad decisions in one night, part of a single situation that could be considered multiple for the purposes of advanced sentencing. So that's where the Wooden case comes in, where there's a gentleman who in 1989, he got in an aggravated assault case in Georgia. In 1997, which is the critical crime, he had entered a small storage facility and ran through, and they say burglarized 10 different storage units in the facility. And so the state in that case tried him for 10 counts of burglary because he went to each one of those storage facilities. And so flash forward, now mind you, that was in 1997. Fast forward to 2014, the Tennessee Police Department, I think narcotics division of the police department, were looking for another fugitive. And they had gotten intelligence to say that the fugitive was at Mr. Wooden's house. Now, Mr. Wooden being an ex-felon, they go and approach and they say, is this guy here? And I guess they wanted to talk to his wife, Wooden's wife, and she says, I'm going to go get her. The officer goes into his house and they find him in possession of a firearm and ammunition. And if you understand in federal law, felons cannot be in possession of a firearm and ammunition. So he gets convicted of that. When it gets to the sentencing stage of the trial, the federal government said, oh, well, this qualifies for a sentencing enhancement under the 3 Strikes Law, which is the Armed Career Criminals Act, because of those 10 separate incidents that they call separate incidents in 1997. So it's like literally 14 years prior was still kind of following him. And that's why we got involved, is because of the impact it have on children. You have one night of bad decisions, and now I have a predicate offenses to make me have a minimum of 15 years in prison, when it was just like, I could have been drunk or just not doing what I was supposed to do. I mean, kids make bad decisions because their brains are not developed. They don't have full information. I mean, you're growing. The other side of that is if that was going to be applied to kids where they made one bad decision a night and all of that was going to count towards the three strikes law, there's no real chance for rehabilitation. I mean, 15 years later, you're going to be older. You may not have an interest, may not be able to get a job because you're a felon. It'd be hard for you to get a job. The career you want to do may be limited. So it was a good opportunity for us to get in the ground and advocate on behalf of children, in this case, in the Wooden case.
Okay. Can you explain for those that are listening how the three-strike rule impacts more specifically juveniles and children, and how this is a law that is it's an inequity in terms of how it is applied to juveniles and children? Can you explain that?
Yeah, definitely. So the ACCA, which is the Armed Career Criminals Act, was passed around 1984. And essentially what it says is if you commit felonies, dangerous felonies or serious drug crimes on different occasions from one another, and that's what the court is kind of interpreting is that word occasions, then you qualify for the minimum 15-year minimum sentence, right? And 15-year all the way up to life without parole. And now, because most of the states in the union allow children to be tried as adults, then that Armed Career Criminal Act, that ACCA, is going to apply to children who are tried as adults. And when that occurs, right, you might have an 18-year-old or 17-year-old, and it's below 18, so 17 or 16-year-old who has a bad night, goes joyriding, crashes into a car, to a tree, just a bunch of stuff that would qualify as felonies that may, would qualify under the statute that may cause this person to stay in jail for a minimum 15 years and have no chance of real, true rehabilitation. And so it's kind of like the court has to consider the far-reaching impacts of what it's going to do in Wooden. Generally, again, the Armed Career Criminal Act, it was really passed for dangerous individuals who are recidivists, right? Not for children who make mistakes, or not for Mr. Wooden, who had one night where he broke into several storage facilities, and then 14 years later, with as I understand it, otherwise clean record, is coming back to haunt him. Right. So that's the potential impact on children. I think until we have the Supreme Court saying we're not going to try children as adults, and there's a whole line of jurisprudence that that talks about treating children as adults. For example, in 2005, the Supreme Court decided Roper versus Simmons, which essentially said you cannot sentence a child under 18 to the death penalty. You cannot do that for capital crimes. So the Supreme Court as a body understands that there's a difference between children. And even through that case, if you read it, you'll see them talking about the development of children, the brain development, the ability to appreciate the consequences of their actions, the wrongfulness of their conduct. So the Supreme Court has jurisprudence that understands that children are children that need to develop. But, throughout different iterations of the court, and you have different people, different sides or philosophies, more conservative, more liberal, then you get other jurisprudence that says, well, wait a minute, they can do life without parole for children who commit homicidal crimes. And then it says, I guess a couple of years ago, they tried to say each case would have to have individual scrutiny, individualized scrutiny. Now I think it was the Miller versus Alabama case. But then later they said, no, in Jones, Mississippi, they said you don't have to have individualized scrutiny for life without parole. So you see, if a child gets sentenced to life, that's the end of their life, and they're a child. So again, there's no opportunity for them to be really rehabilitated. It's purely just keeping them off the street and turning them into a career criminal while you're labeling them as a career criminal. And that's what we sought to eradicate. But also I'll say one last thing. On that point, we also know about the racial inequity in the criminal justice system is applied. So even more so with the impact of the Supreme Court's ruling is going to have on children, we already know it's going to have a disparate impact on Black and brown children. And so that's even more of a motivation for me to stand up and fight and advocate for the court to kind of treat children as children and not blend the two. And so I think that's the unique risk and danger that the Supreme Court's decision could have on children.
Excellent. Thank you for that detailed response. That's excellent. I'm going to play devil's advocate with you for a few seconds. So let's say you have, as you know, since the pandemic, we have had a spike in crime across the United States. In cities like yours. You are from Baltimore, Maryland. I am from St. Louis, Missouri. These urban corridors, they tend to be incubators for crime. And you have all of this crime that's taking place, and very, very violent crimes at that. And so many times gangs will recruit young people to commit heinous crimes because the mentality with many of the gang members are, if we get a young person to commit this crime, they will not have the sentencing guidelines that we will have. And so they have many of these young people committing heinous crimes that carry serious weapons. What would be your thoughts for a group of young people, let's say 13, 12, 13, and 14, that go out with a semi-automatic and they shoot several people in one night? And they are charged with homicide and, carrying weapons, and all of these different types of crimes are compiled. What do you think? How do you think the Supreme Court and many of the jurisdictions view these types of serious violent crimes as it relates to young people?
Well, I think it's still important because I understand that. I mean, we still have to protect the public and make sure that even if they're 14, 15, that they don't commit these heinous crimes or get access to these dangerous weapons. But at the same time, we have to remember that 13, 14, 15. So it's not the same level. And even the Supreme Court has mentioned this in several cases, even the Roper case, that the culpability of a child because of their mind state and the developmental process of human development is not the same as an adult. So even though they might commit these heinous crimes and we don't want them to, I mean, deterrence would be ideal. But like you said, there's certain urban centers, and due to different circumstances and situations, these kids might find themselves in a place where they can get recruited by gangs, and so, where they don't have the supervision or parental involvement. I think those kids this is even more important for them because they need opportunity. So if you're 14, 15, and you commit this heinous crime at the behest of a gang leader, you need the opportunity to get removed from that situation and to be able to develop and mature as a normal human being. Not saying you shouldn't be punished at all, but it shouldn't be a complete life sentence to dictate the rest of your life because you're not as culpable as a 13, 14, 15-year-old. Your brain continues to develop. Your frontal lobe is not fully developed. You can't appreciate the wrongfulness of your conduct at times. And so because of that, we need to give them a chance. Now, they might be staying there for a couple of years, right? It may not be a in and out or a slap on the wrist necessarily because this is dangerous. They need to appreciate that. But they shouldn't be with adults, and they shouldn't be treated as adults. And they should be given at least an opportunity to come back to society, return to society. Things that we've done, I mean, I'm sure all of us have done stupid things or things that are not, maybe not kill somebody, but something that's not wise, right? As a 14, 15-year-old that we don't want to be held accountable as an adult for, that we learned our lesson. Now, it's a graver thing to take a life, and I understand that. But again, that 13, 14, 15-year-old may not appreciate the significance of that because they don't have the rearing or the family background or whatever the case may be, or the influence of the streets is just so strong. We have to still be able to, while punish them, the punishment should be for rehabilitation, to give them an opportunity to develop and mature and get back on the right path, and not to lock them up, throw away the key, they're done.
I love their response because that is how I view many of these children or young people that's out there in the streets. Many of them are out there because they did not have the parental support, the lack of parental support, and it feeds into these opportunities for them to get involved in criminal activities. And then these gangs and these older adults that recruit these kids, they are totally aware of what they are doing. They manipulate the fact that they do not have parents or home structure. They manipulate that, and then they bring these kids in to commit crimes. And these kids are, like you're saying, stating, the frontal lobe isn't developed. If they had more opportunities in life, if they were exposed to greater opportunities in life, who would choose this type of a lifestyle? Who would choose it? No one. Okay. They choose it because they don't have that exposure. And these private schools are good schools. Many of these young people, they live in some of the most dangerous areas of the neighborhoods and in the city. And they have to almost comply to the demands of these gang members to stay alive. Or many of them get involved in criminal activities because they do not have food, they do not have clean clothes. I work with young people for years, and some of the conditions that many of our young people live under, people wouldn't believe it. They don't have lights, they don't have gas, they don't have food. I mean, some of their conditions are really horrible. I am not justifying any type of criminal activity because you come from a bad environment. I'm not suggesting that nor implying it. But what I am saying is they definitely need a second chance, and they do not need to be defined and classified as this type of individual when they have not had an opportunity. And this is one of the things that I don't really understand about this whole classification of young people. How can they really classify them as a career criminal when they're just 13 or 14 years old? I mean, the title itself doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
what are your thoughts about that? Just a whole classification of them. And again, this has a systemic nature to it of racism, because most of these kids that are classified like this are from underserved communities, poor communities, and so forth. What are your thoughts about this title, this label of career criminals?
That's exactly what we put in our brief, and I mean, it was critical to our analysis and our argument was the fact that you have these young people, because they could be tried as adults. I haven't said anything about that, who could be labeled when the statute wasn't enacted to prevent anything about a young person making a bad decision. It was for the adult career criminals who go out and murder people, come out, have no remorse, right? They're gone. I mean, they are developed, they're fully understand or aware what they're doing, or even if they're not, they're still dangerous enough to we need to do something because they're 25, 26, older, more mature, and they just gave their life to crime. So if you have several of these murders or several of these drug related serious offenses, then that's who Congress was intending to protect the public from, not from children. You have children out because of a technicality, they make a bad decision or they make a series of bad decisions in one night, which is what happened in Woodin. I mean, a guy went to one storage facility and broke into all the storage centers. And because he could have stopped after one, the Sixth Circuit, which is the court before the Supreme Court, said, well, there are different occasions because he could have stopped after one. So if the court says that one criminal spree could have been several occasions because of the different discrete kind of elements of that crime, a kid could do something similar, right? Be 14, 15, tried as an adult, and now their label of a career criminal follows them for the rest of their life because it's 3 or more strikes. So now every time they get charged federally, and that's what the difference was. And the thing about Wooden case, which even brings the point out more, was the state of Tennessee did not, or because it's the state, it was a commonwealth, but the state of Tennessee did not bring state charges against them for being a felon in possession. It was the federal, right, the District of Tennessee, I think it was the Eastern District of Tennessee, that brought the charges. So it wasn't even that clear cut of a crime to where Mr. Wooden was like just clearly guilty. It was just the state of Tennessee said, you know what, there's no probable cause. But the federal prosecutor said, no, we're going to bring this charge of a felon being in possession of firearms, just I think 18 U.S.C. 922. And so, and it's used all the time. And so you see how even something minor where the kid did something at 14, paid his debt to society, and then comes at 21 and has he's a felon, but he has a gun, or somebody in the house there he's staying has a gun because I don't have an option to just go live where I want to live. I'm gonna be living with felons because of my family members. Those are my relatives, right? And that's a similar situation, right? Where it's kind of like I don't have the opportunities, and it's hard. I mean, it's easy for somebody to get out when you have opportunities. If you don't have opportunities, but even if I'm trying to get my life straight, this 14, 15-year-old, the mistake I made when I'm 14, 15-year-old is still going to follow me as an adult. And I'm trying to get my life right, but I do a technical violation. And now I'm going to jail for at least 15 years as a career criminal because of some mistake I made or a series of mistakes I made as a young teenager. So, I mean, I really think that the court needs to think about that. I mean, think about the impact it's going to have and the ability for people. Like I said, my main thing is rehabilitation. That's the key, is like rehabilitation. We don't want to throw away citizens that can be rehabilitated away. We don't want that. And even, from the religious world, you're not coming from church world, there's always that redemption that people are looking for. So from even that perspective, this is a child, right? The child should be able to be redeemed after they receive that punishment. It shouldn't be, well, now if you do any other technical felony from here on out, that's at least 15 years. So your life, chunks of your life is being taken away as opposed to giving you an opportunity to rectify your behavior.
I was looking at this issue as it relates to Haiti, and I know this is a different country, different rules of law. Right now, it's kind of an uproar. They don't really have a structured government right now, but with these missionaries that have been kidnapped by this gang. And I don't know if you saw any of the footage, but many of these kids, some of those gang members, they look really young. Okay. I'm like, okay, what is this? A children's gang? And then you have the leader. So in cases like this, you see the dysfunctionalism of the country. And then you see how the dysfunctionalism of a country brings in children to get the structure that they lack. And everyone knows that Haiti is up in uproar right now. And as this country is in further uproar, you will see more young people getting involved so they can have food, so they can have shelter, and more importantly, so that they can be safe. Many young people get in gangs and get involved in a criminal enterprise so that they can remain safe. So how does this relate to this conversation? As the United States continue to be in uproar in urban areas, no structure is put in place in urban areas to combat the crime in urban areas. I believe more and more kids are going to get pulled in to the criminal enterprise and so forth, and that our court dockets are going to be flooded with young people that are doing heinous acts because they want to stay safe and they want to be protected within a family structure. The gang or this group is a family structure. We have a problem that's taking place in St. Louis right now, where we have young people, and I looked at some of the footage of these kids. Someone sent me a videotape of some kids out late at night down on Washington Avenue, jumping on cars, fighting in the middle of the streets. It was, when I say chaotic, it was chaotic. Some of these kids looked as young as 12 years old. How can you be out this late at night 12, fighting in the streets unless you lack structure? What are your thoughts about this?
Exactly. And that's the thing that goes back to the whole, I guess, disparity between, I was to say, African Americans and white people, where you have like Kyle Rittenhouse, who had some family structure during the Kenosha situation, where the police shooting up there, and he comes and murders 2 other people, and they questioning whether they're going to treat him a certain way, right? As opposed to like the kids that's just jumping on cars, not just, but maybe vandalizing in their African American kids who in a certain part of the town, they're going to take them in, right? I mean, you could drive down Baltimore City and you'll see young people on the curb like this with cops doing something, and it does. That's either drugs, right, which is I would say a nonviolent crime. Yes, they don't need to be doing it, but it's not like they're murdering somebody or it's just kind of one of those crimes that it's like, this is more of a poverty crime, right? And even if you look at the social sciences, they say that crime is more related to poverty than race anyway. So when you don't have as much, you don't have many opportunities, you don't have the money coming in, as you mentioned, some people don't even have food, right, or consistent source of food. Then you're going to find the desperate or the easiest way to kind of get that. And a lot of times that's crime, especially if you live in a neighborhood where everybody's already doing it anyway. I remember I had friends from Brooklyn, and they've gotten older, but they were all talking, sharing stories independently about how they sold crack. And I'm sitting there like, and I'm not thinking that they engage that because I know them now, their lives now. But as children and young people, it was the thing to do. Everybody did it. So we all still, and so that's another thing is it's like kind of, you're in this situation where you don't have the best resources, the best economic situation. And so you see a way that I can get quick economic on my feet, or at least possible, and everybody's already doing it anyway. So I don't feel like it's wrong. It's different when your mom is handing you an 8-ball of cocaine and tell you to cook it up. It's different than if your mom's telling you that, right? Than your homeboy. And a lot of people don't understand that. It's like, that's my mother. She's a person that taught me how to tie my shoes. So if she tells me to go ahead and do this, I don't think anything's wrong with that. So the cops are just enemies as opposed to, right? So it does go back to, the resources, the family structure, and the kind of like backgrounds you have to support you and to give you the basic necessities of food and shelter. I mean, if you don't have that, then you can be running around. So I definitely agree with what you're saying in terms of how the crimes usually skew towards people who have less economic means, who don't have that support and that background. And again, it's ultimately going to come to be discriminatory against a certain group of people, us, in a certain part of town, right? It's already over prosecuted, already over monitored by police anyway. Whereas you got this kid from I think Illinois, who goes to Wisconsin, I mean, literally cross state lines with a gun he's not supposed to have and murders 2 people, and they questioning him whether what they should do about it. Where that was Jamal, that they're going to take him to jail and ask questions later. So again, it's even more important that we get it right, because it's not just the impact it's on children, but it's going to be a harsher impact on our children than it was on most other people. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Missionary Dakiba Rogers, for your comments. Minister Donnie Savage for your comments. And for those that's listening on the radio, thank you for the text messages regarding this subject. This is a very important subject matter, because if you don't invest in young people and do not take interest in them, you will meet them at some point. If you ignore them, you will meet them at some point. And for the organization, Human Rights for Kids, do they have summer job programs and different programs that help facilitate job readiness skills and so forth?
So we're actually working on that now.
Okay.
The primary work, and that's actually a great question, because the founder, I'm working with the founder now of James to develop kind of those similar types of programs and access to it. So right now, the first phase of his, because right, I think around, he's the technically only employee. So he's kind of running around doing things with the board. And so he's trying to build it out. But right now, the focus of the organization is legislation, like through our state legislatures and through Congress and the courts, to try to get laws passed, and an awareness. So we tell people where the laws are best for children's rights and where they're worst. We did a scorecard, I want to say last year, which is available, I think, on our website, that shows the different risk areas of places that have criminal justice laws that are not favorable to children or doesn't consider them, and where they're doing a little bit better of a job. And I think that's some helpful material. But the next step is to do that kind of work. Like, for instance, we did work, it took initiative where when COVID first started, there were juveniles who were incarcerated, and we tried to find ways to try to petition the powers that be to get them out, especially for smaller nonviolent crimes during COVID. This is to stop the spread, and they're already doing compassionate release for a lot of people. Even hardened criminals were getting compassionate release, so we were trying to kind of push that in the DMV area. But yes, that's the next step, is just try to get pipelines for people. Another organization I joined actually does that, but Human Rights for Kids is building out its staff now. And, as I said, we appreciate all the support for this great work that they're doing. And so as the staff builds out, that's the next phase, is those type of programs.
That's great, because I was involved in job readiness programs for young people, where we would find employment for those young people over the summer, pay them a higher wage, and then give them training and, skills. So when the program is over, those skills and that job experience is transferable to the next opportunity for those young people. And so I just think that's a critical piece. The work that the Human Rights for Kids, the body of work that they are doing is phenomenal. And we celebrate you and salute you on the work that you are doing. But we want to undergird that work with job opportunities and job readiness programs, because that's a big piece of it. And so those partnerships with corporations and so forth that will give those young people jobs and training, that is going to be a critical piece to those kids staying out of that drug infested environment. Because going back to your friends that sold crack, I mean, that is a way of life. That's like many of that's their first job. Okay. Right. How you did summer, you go and you work at the ice cream place, or you work at Subway or wherever. Many of these kids, their first job is selling crack. Okay. Being a lookout for individuals that's selling drugs, and, on the rooftop looking for the police. That's their first job. And when young people have been recruited to do these types of jobs, and we're pulling them out of this lifestyle, we have to then replace it with something else. And so it's just great to hear the work that your friend is doing and so forth. And we want you to come back and bring some more of your colleagues on, so we can talk about this subject more in depth with the other colleagues and so forth. Can you just share with us the states that are some of the worst states for children's rights?
Mhm. So it's mostly the southern states, right? So and I think your state is one of them. That Missouri, I think, is doing well. Mississippi is doing horribly. Alabama's doing horribly. So as generally you see the southern the southern more conservative leaning states are the ones that tend to be less cognizant of the impact of their laws on children. But
Mm-hmm.
then you have states like California that does a little bit better. And just the point I was reading to this today, California this year passed a law. The legislature passed a law, and the court upheld it and found it constitutional that did not allow 14, 15-year-old children to be tried as adults, right? Because they didn't want them to go into jail with adults. And so that's progress. So they're doing well. They think about it. Maryland is doing fairly well. I think we're in the middle of the road, but
Mm-hmm.
not as well as we could be doing. But when you look at the Alabamas, Mississippi's, I think Missouri's, and even Tennessee's, we can use more help in those areas. Arizona, I think it was another one that wasn't doing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, I don't want to say because Human Rights for Kids, like I said, is has both parties represented throughout, right? So it's not necessarily that issue, but for some reason, a lot of times in the more conservative states, those are the ones that are harsher on children. Even I told you a story with Louisiana being one of the states with the Edwards case that had the 10-2, and there was impact. Again, it kind of follows that the civil rights kind of leans left a lot. I mean, it just does.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say that other people who are not, liberal, who are more conservative, don't care about this, because I have several examples of people who are conservatives who are supporting the organization and care about these issues. Matter of fact, the vice president of the board, John Ellum, I think leans more conservatively. And again, we're all on the same team. That didn't even come up when we're talking about this issue. So although those states that are more conservative don't do as well, that doesn't mean that we don't have allies on that side that care about these issues and help us out. So
What advice would you give to individuals that are interested in this subject matter? They want to get involved with their state legislatures to help bring more awareness to this issue and to make laws more amenable for young people who have not had an opportunity to really get started in life. What are some of the things that they can do?
yeah, so you can start at going to humanrightsforkids.org, and there's a lot of interesting literature there, so you can understand the problems and the issues. I mean, we all kind of know in a nebulous fashion what's going on, but in terms of concrete, like on the ground, we have different examples of people that are being impacted by these laws as children. And so I think if you kind of do your research, so you'll have specific concrete examples to discuss, and then reach out to your state and the federal legislators, and write them letters, attend town halls if you can, and kind of just promote, ask questions, demand things, and then go to the polls. I mean, it's not just about voting, but again, that is part of it, right? You want to make sure that the people who are in these positions of power to introduce legislation, to sign legislation, if you're governor, mayor, county executive, are aware of the potential, the impact of their decisions on the civil rights of children, and the fact that you are interested and you can get a community, a group around you to support this effort. And so strength in numbers. So it's not just about educating yourself, but educate your circle, and then put the pressure on. And this is not just for this topic. I mean, for this topic too, but for other things that you're passionate about, you can put the pressure on your state and local representatives, because your vote gets them elected. And so they should listen to their constituents, because that's how they're going to get reelected. If they don't, then you need to, okay, we're going to hold our vote hostage. That's how the democratic process works. But I think it's key that you first get educated on the topics, on the concrete examples of how these situations can impact children, because you may not have been intuitive of that, the fact that a career criminal could be attached to a child, right? You may not have thought about that, but if you educate, read more, then it's like, oh, that makes sense how a child could be branded for life, and that's not fair. So then throughout the proper channels of contacting your local representatives, now you're educated, informed, and empowered to say, no, we don't need to do this. We need to do this. And then with educating your circle and circle of influence, now you have numbers to help you, right? Because those numbers for them, it may just be votes, but sometimes that's all you need, is to threaten the fact that you're not going to be in that seat the next term if you don't make some changes, or at least advocate, right? So I think that's important, is to educate, advocate, and then it doesn't help to donate, So donate to positive missions that are doing things, not just missions that are taking your money, but things that are people actually going out and doing the work to try to protect these children's rights.
Very good. What do you think about IQ? Have you seen a correlation between the IQ level of children that commit crimes and the sentencing guidelines? Not the sentencing guidelines, but the sentencing. That these kids have low IQs or higher IQs, or what is your information on that issue?
Yeah, so based on my research, the lower IQ individuals tend to be more prone to criminal activity. That's just kind of like, I think the Bureau of Labor Statistics or Bureau of Criminal Statistics um, might have those numbers specifically, but I think it is tied to lower IQs are the ones that are more prone to committing these crimes, which again is important because it's like access to your normal development, right? If you're not developing as a child because you don't have the resources, not necessarily because of a mental impairment or a learning disability, but just because you don't have people who are pouring into you to develop your mind, and you going around, or you might be taking certain drugs that as a child are going to impair your ability to reason and think and will affect your IQ. I think those based on the statistics, they're more prone to do more crimes, but that's even more of a reason why we need to think about that in terms of development as opposed to just throwing them away, because these people may not be playing with a full deck, and it's not necessarily their own fault. It's a circumstance. So we're just going to throw away all the kids. No, we have to. This is the Bible say, comfort the feeble-minded, right? So you have to sometimes, we have to take care of the more vulnerable populations of our community, and so I think throwing them away is not the answer. But yes, I think the correlation is the lower the IQ, generally, lower IQ individuals are the ones that commit more of the crimes.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vanessa Brown, for tuning in. Dr. Brown has done an outstanding body of work with young people for years as a former social worker. She's written books and so forth to help young people. And now she's doing work with the university and still involved with assisting young people. And that's what we need. We need people to assist us on a global scale as well as throughout the United States to help with the young people. Let's talk about housing for a moment, and then I want to get into the other not-for-profit that you work with that's focused on the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Housing. Are there any programs established to help young people to obtain housing, to get apartments? Do you know of any of if the human rights advocacy for youth, if they're involved with partnering with maybe a condominium complex or apartment to remove them from this environment that is so negative and extreme and poverty and so forth? Do you know of any opportunities like that for young people?
Yeah, so we don't necessarily do that, but I think we have partner organizations. I'm pretty sure we do have partner
Mm-hmm.
organizations that focus more on housing and placement for people, mostly indigent young people. They probably wouldn't do it for kids that are under 18, just because they're minors and ability to contract and all that stuff like that. But for parents, young parents with young children. I think those organizations mostly try to find housing, transitional housing, affordable housing for individuals like that. But we do partner and refer individuals to programs like that. And like you said, though, I think that's important. In addition to the jobs, it's kind of like, well, we're trying to save them, but we have to give them something, right, to start or help them start. And I think those go hand in hand, right? You can't just try to save them something and it's like, well, okay, now you're free. It's like, well, what do I do now, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think
I'm
that's
going right
important.
back into the environment where I live or I got
Exactly.
involved.
exactly. But yeah, we do have partner organizations for that, but mostly for, I see, younger parents with small children, not so much children under 18.
Okay, very good. Now, we're going to just shift here for a moment and we're going to discuss your other organization that you're very heavily involved with. You are tuned in to Legal Views with attorney Sheila Stuart, and we have the one and only attorney Tony Torain with us on today, and he's doing a great job educating us on fundamental rights that are being violated for our young people and how we can get involved and what we can do to make a difference for them. Now, just tell us about this other organization that you sit on the board. You and I are both are labor and employment attorneys. Now, I normally go up against the Posanellis of the world. Okay. It's always Sheila Stuart, the David and Goliath syndrome.
That's right.
Okay. But the Lord has blessed us. We do quite
That's right.
well.
That's
Okay.
right.
So tell us about your other organization that you are involved with, where you work so entirely to remedy systemic racism in the workforce.
Definitely. So that organization is Associated Black Charities, was here in Maryland, and the focus of that organization, actually, I'm the first vice president of the chair, first vice chair of the board, which has a lot of surprise duties that I didn't realize, but it's a labor of love. It's a labor of love, and I'm happy to do it, happy to be part of that fight too. But the goal of Associated Black Charities is to eliminate systemic racism in the workforce ecosystem. So what we do in that situation, we do have job readiness programs, and we also have job placement programs and partnerships with corporations in the region that do things like mentorship. So we have career mentorship, where we have volunteers that will take our class of mentors, teach them how to be professional, teach them, which is required for certain things in the industries, whatever industry it may be. It could be banking, could be energy, could be any industry, but it gives them exposure to that. And then it places them, it gives them opportunity to be placed in permanent jobs. So we're very proud of that volunteer career mentorship aspect. Also the board pipeline. So we give people board training to sit on nonprofit boards. And so we're hoping that nonprofit board experience will transition into for-profit board experience, but it just gives them, kind of exposure to things you need to consider as being a board member, networking opportunities to meet with members of the board, but also our outside stakeholders who are donors. So we're really, really proud of the work we're doing with them. We also have things like the 10 essential questions. And so what we did was, and I'm very impressed with this. I was, as a board member, I'm like very happy we're doing this. We had 10 essential questions that we first started with the Maryland, because it's a Maryland organization, but the Maryland State Legislature, which is the Maryland General Assembly, and we would give them to the state legislatures. And I was friends with a couple of individuals who were actually legislators, and the staff will be giving them 10 essential questions, which are things to consider when you're trying to eliminate racial disparities in your sphere of influence, right? When you're passing legislation, ask yourself these questions, right? Is this what impact is going to have on the races? Is it going to have a disparate impact on other races? Just things like that. And we were essentially not necessarily monetizing them, it was proprietary, but we were handing them out to them and saying, look, when you draft a bill or prepare to draft a bill, think about these 10 essential questions so you can build into your analysis the need for racial equity. So that way it's not, and a lot of them have to do with workforce and job programs, but even other types of legislation. They say, go through the 10 essential questions to see how they're going to impact, the race relations and racial equity. And is it going to support racial equity, or is it going to further and enhance the disparity between minorities or African-Americans and Caucasians? And so we wound up taking that 10 essential questions and also giving them to the corporations. So when you make hiring decisions, when you make firing decisions, when you make any type of personal decisions, ask yourself these questions to gauge your race, whether you're achieving racial equity or whether you're just further, widening the gap. And it's been very helpful. People have enjoyed it. We also give racial training. We have this video that we show.
I'm sorry, Tony. Can you share with us these 10 essential questions?
Yeah, I got you. I actually have them right here for you. I'm gonna.
Okay, I really would like to know what they are.
But yeah, I mean, really. Everybody, people, even like I'm talking about people who are not of color, have read these questions, have used these questions, and essentially asked them to test their biases and test their to see whether they're actually trying to achieve racial equity or not. So I have a couple of them. Here's the 10 situations. So one is, how is a equity lens incorporated within a policy that you're creating? So this is for like employers. Is there a racial equity lens that you're reading this policy through, or are you just kind of putting something together because you're trying to minimize or enhance a personnel decision, and which could be racially disparate? Second one is, does the policy explicitly account for the potential racially disparate outcomes? If so, how? If not, how can it be incorporated? So essentially, are you taking into account the possibility of a racial disparity in what you're about to do? And a lot of times it's not a blatant racism situation. Sometimes it's subtle, where you pass a neutrally or facially neutral policy, but it impacts people differently just because of the various circumstances. So number two, ask you to review that before you put it together. The third one is, how is an equity lens incorporated in tracking the policy outcomes? So are you looking through a racial equity lens when you're seeing how the policy actually, after it's implemented, how it impacts your workforce, right? Are you considering that? Are the outcomes, this creating a disparity with people of color or minorities? Four is, will the policy increase access and opportunity for communities of color? And if so, how? So again, it's really challenging to see, is this going to be able to give opportunities to people who are traditionally disenfranchised or people who are historically treated differently? Are you considering that? Or is this, you just kind of going through your normal day? Five is, will the policy have a positive impact on racial / ethnic equity, inclusion, and full participation of all people in the process, in the implementation, in the breadth of outreach, and the participation in the decision making, and in the culture of decision making? So all of this is just, we talk about racial equity or this diversity, but inclusion is more important, because you can have diversity, but if I don't participate, if I'm not part of the decision making, if I'm not part of creating the process, I'm not really included. And it still leads to a risk where people who are not thinking about racial equity will pass a policy or create a policy and implement it that disproportionately affects me because I wasn't involved in decision making. I wasn't considered in the outcomes. And so it's very important just to check that. I think that's helpful. And I can send these to you too. 6 is, will the policy protect against racial violence, racial profiling, and discrimination? Wow. If so, how? 7 is, what are the mechanisms in place to ensure accountability? All right. Each as equity-focused benchmarks or indicators, right? Are we tracking the impact of these policies on racial equity if we're trying to enhance racial equity in our workplace or in passing the law? 8 is, do the lens and tools for accountability incorporate a racial equity framework? How, right? And it's not just saying does it and say yes, no. If so, how is it in creating a racial equity framework, in the sense that you're advancing people of color who are traditionally disadvantaged, and not just advancing them, but making sure that your policy or your statute or whatever you're trying to pass takes into account the fact that there are historical disparities and that we're trying to eliminate that and not just trying to enhance it. 9 is, are there changes that could be made to make the policy more equitable and inclusive? Again, you have that racial, it's not just diversity, but it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? I want to be a part of the decision making, and does this policy help with that? And then 10 is, what are the economic and social benefits of incorporating an equity lens in this policy? So again, it's not just about doing the right thing, but it's also a business case for being sensitive to diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the sense that and I've done this even diversity training for some of my clients to show that businesses that take into account diversity generally do better on average on the bottom line net income. And when you similar size businesses, when you kind of compare them across sectors, the ones that take equity, race, diversity, equity, inclusion seriously tend to do better financially. I think it's like by 10%. Wow. And so it's important that not just we can do the right thing, but it also is a business case to do the right thing that is going to affect your bottom line. So I'll send it to you. And if everybody wants
outstanding. And many people do not realize and understand that inclusion in corporations will impact their bottom line. They don't get that. That diversity, that a more diverse organization will have more financial gains.
Definitely.
The studies have consistently showed that over and over and over again.
Definitely. And then last year we had the George Floyd situation, and everybody, obviously, people are saying, oh, obviously you see somebody murdered on national TV with their knee in their neck. Now we're going to Black Lives Matter. We've been dealing with that for years, right? Before I was born, my grandparents, great grandparents, we've been dealing with that for years. So it took for that. Now all these big corporations, some of whom are successors of slave owning entities or successors of slave insuring entities, are now coming out saying Black Lives Matter. Well, okay, let's see if it truly matters, right? But we're glad you're saying it now, but let's see if you're going to actually implement it. And let's see if you're actually going to consider diversity, equity, and inclusion in your policy making, in your promotions, in your hiring, in your advancement, in your training. Because as we talked about a little bit, as being a management side attorney, right? Sometimes, people might think that I don't think that discrimination and stuff like that actually occurs. Where it's like, no, I know because I have to defend some of that stuff. I know it actually occurs. And as a brother, because I am a brother, like I said, we know that. And some people ain't brothers. I'm a brother. I understand that there is that disparity. And so, like I said, I salute, and also Attorney Stuart, y'all recently got some recognition where you were one of the top employment firms in St. Louis. So congratulations for that. So, I mean, I definitely understand. Even I think if I hadn't been doing it so long, then I might have a different feeling about being representing the man. But with my diversity and inclusion training, I feel like that gives me the opportunity to go internally and say, look, okay, I remember I did diversity and inclusion training for a company, national company that makes chips. And it was via Zoom because it was during the pandemic. And I was the youngest and the only African American, like literally only person of color on the screen. So it was like, CEO was on there, vice president of operations, vice president of this, all these people. And it was one woman and all bunch of white men. And it was just me. And so once I got through my first shock, I was like, no, this is an opportunity for you to level set. They wanted you for a reason. You see how they look. They wanted you for a reason. So be yourself. So I was myself. The session went really great, but I was an opportunity for me to tell them, like, look, your C-suite is too white. Like, I mean, and it's not that you don't want people who are not qualified, but there are qualified people who look like me who should be on your C-suite. And this is unacceptable in 2021 that you can't find anybody to help us. So it was a good opportunity to go behind the veil and to say, because you're gonna keep them honest by making sure they treat their employees right. If not, you're gonna sue them and make sure you get a payday. And then I feel like my part of the job is to go behind them and say, look, y'all need to get this together. And especially with federal contractors have affirmative action requirements, right? And that's part of my practice is to go behind and make sure their AEPs, affirmative action plans, are in place and make sure they're complying with the federal executive orders and different regulations of the FAR that they need to, that says you need to be hiring minorities, women, individuals with disabilities, and protected veterans. So I kind of use that as my internal fight the man thing. Like, look, y'all need to switch it up, at the very least, because you're going to pay a fine for not promoting or adequately promoting or recruiting people who you need to be recruiting. So.
Well, thank you so much. You have done an outstanding job with us on today. We're coming to the end of our program. We definitely want you to come back. This information has just been so rich, and we want you to come back and to bring some of your colleagues with you, and we can discuss these issues further. We would like for you to have the last words. And thank you so much, Attorney Torain, for being with us on this evening. Would you like to have the last few words?
Yeah, just to wrap it up, I thank you so much for the opportunity. If you're interested for more information, you can go to humanrightsforkids.org. You can go to www.abc-md.org, which is for Associated Black Charities. And you can kind of read, and the 10 essential questions are on the ABC website. But if you need them, just let me know, because I think it's good. I mean, you can take them to your employer, especially if you're an HR professional or in any position of influence, and say, I think we need to talk about this. Give them to your diversity and inclusion person. So just, feel free to reach out if you want that. But I appreciate the opportunity. I definitely, if you have me, I definitely will be back, and I'll bring James with me because to tell you his background and his story and how he got involved in the work. So thank you so much. And if anything you need, you got me, Attorney Stuart. So I really appreciate you as well. So.
Thank you so much. Stay with me a few seconds. You have been listening to Legal Views with Attorney Sheila Stuart. Thank you for spending this evening with us. We appreciate your comments. We appreciate you tuning in on Saturdays. And please go to our YouTube page under Legal Views with Attorney Sheila Stuart and subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. Thank you so much. And we will see you again next week. Goodbye. Daryl, the mic is yours.